Hello and welcome to 30 Minutes of Wisdom, Rising in Consciousness and Mindfulness. My name is Oren Shai, and I'm so grateful to be here with Maria Loida. She is a dear friend and somebody I've had the pleasure of knowing for a number of years now. We actually met on the mat in yoga class, which is just so appropriate for Maria's specialty and area and the way in which she shows up in the world and supports others. So I would love to give Maria an opportunity to come on and say hello and introduce herself.
Thank you, Oren. It's amazing to be here. My name's Maria, and I'm a corporate career coach and a yoga teacher. And both of those things intersect in my work with people, mostly women, in the way that I help them advance their careers and level up their careers without burning out. And so much of my work is about creating what I call sacred success with ease and without sacrifice, and especially the things that we think we have to sacrifice to have a big, full career, or that think we have to sacrifice to have success, like family, like time with family, or a personal life, or even mental or physical health. So I'm so excited to be here to talk about what we're going to talk about today, because I think it's all so important.
Yes, thank you. And this is something we are paying extra attention to, I believe, collectively over the past year and a half, around questioning how do I want to organize my life and my work? What role does my career play in my life? How do I show up in a way that is supportive and energizing and sustainable? And that's one thing I appreciate so much about the work you do in the world. And so today, our topic is about taking one of those common concepts of mindfulness and taking it beyond that word mind, where sometimes, especially in our business environment, we can really over anchor on the mind, but how actually there are more layers to mindfulness that can support us in showing up the way we intend to in a sustainable way. So let's start there, Maria, and we'd love to just invite some of your thoughts around this notion of mindfulness that is used in so many different ways, that means so many different things to different people. How can you just help us anchor on what we're talking about when it comes to mindfulness and what is maybe not mindfulness?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because so there's these two pieces where I'm so happy that the word mindfulness is more commonplace in the American corporate world, or just in the Western world in general, right? Because this idea of mindfulness comes from kind of rooted in like Buddhism or a more like Eastern philosophy. And along with that, because it's more mainstream, there's been like a lot of definitions, a lot of ways that people think about it, or it's more likely that it can get confused for other things. And so I think a really simple definition of mindfulness is an increased or an attention to awareness of the thoughts, emotions, which then lead to awareness of the actions that an individual is taking. I see it as, again, take my definition for what it's worth, but like I find it to be a very personal kind of internal process. I'd love to hear your definition of mindfulness as well. I think that it can be kind of confused often with this idea of like ruminating, or like spending a lot of time in the mind trying to just like follow. A lot of times we call it like following the story. Mm-hmm. Our brains automatically kind of do that. Our brains are automatically kind of wired to analyze and think and try to like figure things out. This is a little different than that, because when we're in that mindset where the automatic brain kind of goes down this path of telling a story about something, it's more of an automatic reaction. When we're believing, we're getting in this phase where we're believing our thoughts, we're believing everything the brain says. Mindfulness is about a little bit more about observing the thoughts just as they are without jumping into the meaning necessarily behind them.
Right.
Yeah, which the difference is kind of like, you're not in mindfulness when you're ruminating, is a great like commonplace example.
Yes. So this distinction between an awareness, a present moment awareness of what is happening in this moment within me, within this context that I'm in. So I'm aware of what is happening, as opposed to I'm attached to the thoughts that come up for me around what is happening, the judgments that I'm making, the perceptions and assumptions that I'm formulating and forming. And so this is an important distinction where, given the way many of us move through our educational system and our work, there's a lot of emphasis placed on more attention, more focus, more getting more of our brain power activated. And this is where we can think about it, or how I like to frame it is where we can look at this idea of focusing, narrowing our scope, which is one way of approaching the world. And then we can look at it in terms of expanding our scope and our perception. So we're seeing what is happening in a broader way around us. So there's this distinction between one that is a little bit more of like what is hyper focused on one thought and then another thought, versus one which is, okay, I'm seeing the landscape of thoughts, of feelings, of people, of scenarios that are here right now.
Yeah, I love that. I think that wider view is a little bit more related to that idea of presence, which we're going to talk about some today. And this idea, like when we're so, like that idea of being like so focused on a thought, a lot of times what happens is we attach to the thought. It's like not the thought or the judgment necessarily that's the problem. It's about the meaning that we attach to that. And that is like the thing that takes us out of the present moment. Yes. When we make the thought about something, and like there's this difference of like observing the thoughts and just seeing them go by and you're like, okay, it's there. And then there's this step that is where we get out of alignment, which is when we make the thought mean something. And when we're doing that, we're usually, again, like ruminating in the past, or like we're regretting the past, or we're like angry about the past, or it shouldn't have been that way, or we're worrying about the future, what will happen, what might this mean down the road. And when we're in the past or when we're in the future, it's so difficult to be in the now. And one thing that I'll share that I find that is so, this idea, the way we talk about it in yoga, is this idea of action without attachment. When you're in the past or when you're in the future, ultimately you're attached. You're attaching to your thought about what happened before or what might happen in the future. And when you're in that place, like a great example is, say you're at work and you are working on a project that's high stakes and you want it to go well, right? Like most of us are going to work not like trying to do a good job, like trying to do a great job. A lot of us, especially in the West, have a thought that caring and doing a good job is almost synonymous with worrying and stressing out about the thing. That is how we are equating caring about or making sure something goes right. However, if you are in stress or if you are in worry, you're in the future, you're worried about how it's going to land, or you're stressed about how it went the last time. And when you're in either of those two mindsets, it's so difficult to just focus on what is the exact task right in front of me right now that I can put my full presence and attention and focus on. And when you're in that place, the limits for creativity, for focus, for new ideas, I mean, it's like endless when you're like, what is to be done right now, instead of like all the extra worry, stress, etc. Yeah. I hope that's like an example that resonates, because it's often confused.
Yes, and this is where we start to get into how do we cultivate these states of flow and get into spaces that are more innovative and creative. And this underpinning, there's a reason why we're beginning to, in mainstream culture, connect mindfulness as a practice, as a way of being, this mindful way of being, to creativity and flow, because it is at the foundation there. And what we're introducing today, or getting deeper into today, is how actually, when we look at mindfulness, there's a level even deeper beyond the mind that spoiler alert, has to do with getting into the body and how cultivating that connection to our body and our felt sense actually supports our ability to be present and mindful. So we'd love to get some of your thoughts around that, Maria.
Yes. I'd like to start with actually what's happening in the body when we are worrying about the past, or really it's like worrying about the future, or like stressed about what happened before. Those two mindsets where we're not in the present moment. Because we're having a thought about, oh no, it might not, I might fail, or it's gonna fail, or I failed last time, so I'm destined to fail again. That just using failure as like a thing that usually triggers like a lot of us, me included, guilty. When we're in that like thought process, I think it's important to identify first, like what's actually happening in the body when that happens. The thought is what creates this automatic reaction in the nervous system. And it's usually an automatic reaction that's very related. We've all kind of heard, like in this conversation of mindfulness, you may have heard this analogy before, but it's the fight, flight, or freeze response. So say you get like really tough feedback at work, and that hurts you a little bit. Like that's for whatever reason, getting like critical feedback is hard for you. Whatever way your automatic nervous system is like threatened, or if you are threatened by that, your nervous system will respond as if you're being like chased by the tiger. Well, really like chased by the tiger. It's like the survival response. And our nervous system creates all of these like feelings. Our adrenaline spikes, cortisol levels go up. It increases the feeling of like stress and like desperation in a way. And so it's important to know that when we're going throughout our day, and you know, I'm using work as like a context here. It could be anything. It could be a conversation with family, or you know, a personal relationship. But I do find that work will often kind of be that trigger, and that's what's happening in the body. So knowing that that's happening in the body, there is also this way. It's connected, and so there's a way also to use the body as a way to create presence, or tap back into, or reteach ourselves from like the core instinct level, how to get back to this idea of presence, or a little bit more mindfulness. And I can share like a couple examples of how that kind of plays out. I think initially, when we have an emotional reaction, when you have that fight or flight response, all these hormones flood your body. And if we don't properly release that, it gets stuck. It's because emotions are vibrations, it's energy. And when energy's stuck, like in any science experiment, it creates pressure, and it either is gonna like explode. Well, that's like kind of, or it creates pain. Like, and so when you like, I use yoga often as a practice to release old emotions. So when you're doing a yoga practice or doing another movement practice, and you feel tension or like tightness in the body, that is a representation of like stuck energy. Often you can sometimes feel it in the muscles. Sometimes it feels more like a gut, you know, like a churning in your stomach, or a tightness of your heart, right? We've all kind of had those feelings as well. And yoga is like so intelligently designed to help us process and create new kind of energetic open pathways for that energy to flow more freely and release from the body. So that's like one way.
I'd like to actually, let's pause there, because I want to make sure to reinforce this idea of release, where if we're talking about cultivating this state of mindful awareness, and we ask ourselves, what gets in the way of that? If I'm somebody, and I've been that somebody who has said at one point in time in my life, oh, I'm not going to sit and meditate. My meditation will be working out or some form of mindful movement. And when we acknowledge that actually to practice mindful awareness, a stillness practice is supportive, what are the things that can get in the way of us being able to cultivate that mindful awareness, having some of this tension that we're holding on to, that we all carry. We all take on stress as we're moving through the modern world, it's unlikely that anybody watching this has been spending the last several years living in a cave without any human interaction. So you've been taking on a little bit of stress. And
yeah,
so
we carry it.
Right, we carry it with us in our tissues. And there's more and more very clear research to demonstrate this. If anybody would like some of those papers, I can't quote from them directly right now, but you can DM me and I'm happy to share them. But this is something that we need to factor in if we're looking to cultivate more expansive awareness. How do we release some of the contraction and holding that exists within our bodies in order to support our ability to do that?
Yeah, and specifically this idea of like sitting and having the meditation practice. We've all seen like the little kid who's antsy, or we've felt it in our own body when we're like at our desk all day and we're like, I'm gonna like jump out of my own skin. There's a reason why your body is responding that way. An example I love is when two ducks like get into a tiff, they like have their thing and then they turn and swim away from each other, and usually they like frantically flap their wings, and then they bring their wings down and they go back to swimming peacefully as if nothing happened. And that moment of like release is their way of like off gassing all of the pent up energy that was created in the conflict. So there's this other concept that I really like called completing the stress cycle. So we can admit that like work is going to maybe be stressful sometimes. Like we can't actually make the stress go away. Like life is going to be full of challenges. It's like nice to just kind of admit that up front, right? But what we can do is when we know that we've had like a really stressful day, or we know that we like got worked up about something at work, the reason movement is so valuable in this process, and it's valuable to do it before you sit down and meditate. This is something that the yogis know and they teach, that the yoga, the asana practice, or the physical poses are meant to be done before you sit down to meditate. And the reason is the same reason as the ducks, where you can complete the stress cycle by moving, by off-gassing energy, and then your body will often be a lot more ready to be calm. One step further than that, when you calm the body, the mind also tends to like calm a little bit or smooth out.
Yeah, I think that's a good reminder of that notion out. Yes, oftentimes when we allow the body to move through that off gassing, to allow the energy to move through, our mind can become a little bit more stable, and a reminder that our mind thinks automatically, and that the goal of being mindful and the goal of our meditation practice, at least in my view, is not to stop the mind. And so if we are attempting to bring more mindfulness and present moment awareness to our day-to-day, what we're not expecting, or in my view, what we should not be expecting, is that we're going to be totally without thought, and any interaction we have is going to be just totally 100% present and clear, devoid of any other thoughts, any other feelings. We are human having an experience. And so there's that level of acceptance that you touched on of stress is going to come. And then it's about us having our practices to help that stress in moving through, help our emotions process. And this is the reason why more and more, as we look at conversations around processing stress, processing trauma, moving through some of these difficult experiences that we encounter in life, is incorporating this body-based work and this movement. Because just as we can have thoughts around these experiences, we have physiological memories of these experiences that also need to move. And when we start to do that, and I see this with client after client, when we start to bring more of that awareness into the body, suddenly it's like we have different levels of intelligence when our awareness of our body starts to come online. And we start to see where our intuition can support us. And we start to see the way in which we can have this combination of analytical, rational thinking and feeling and that level of present moment awareness in the body that supports us in creating from this whole other place.
Yeah. I love this idea that I often tell my yoga students and my clients, that the yoga mat is just this like very safe space to experiment. And there's these opportunities to like pause and almost rewire our nervous system. Like you were saying, there's the automatic thought then moves us into almost an automatic emotional response. And so we can use like these, like you said, these movement practices to give a really like tangible example. A yoga pose like pigeon. If you're familiar with yoga, you know that pigeon is often like everyone's nemesis. But if you don't know what pigeon is, it's a pretty deep hip opener. Like it's a big stretch for the hips, and the hips are a place where we carry a lot of emotional tension. It's like where a lot of energy will hold and build. And so it can often create a very uncomfortable feeling when we get into pigeon pose. And in the yoga practice, we purposefully put ourselves into a difficult pose or a difficult situation. It's like a test run for like going into that stressful conversation with your boss, for going into that meeting and getting critical feedback about yourself. So we're simulating a situation that is difficult, and then we practice breathing in and breathing out and staying with our breath, staying in our bodies, staying in that place of awareness and presence, that place of looking at, okay, this is happening. Can I let it be? Is there a way that I can soften to this? Is there a way I can make this a little bit easier? Can I know that it's just a thought? It's just my mind telling me this is like, being comfortable in the uncomfortable creates a softness. And something that I find that really unlocks things for my clients is when we're in this like softer place and we learn how to relax in the face of conflict, in the face of a difficult moment, what emerges in its place is curiosity. And when we can be curious in a situation, it opens up so many possibilities. Like you said, to be creative, to ask questions. Like think of how many times you've gotten critical feedback when it like hurt and then you just shut down. Like that is a pretty common, or you got really angry and defensive. If you were in a place of curiosity, you might say like, oh, tell me more. Like what's an example where I demonstrated that? And you get specific about what the real feedback is, what's under the feedback or what's underneath the automatic response of shutting down or fighting back. And within that, so much communication can be unlocked and become so much more clear. And that's why, one of many ways, why I think this is so, so, so important to bring right into the corporate world and right into the corporate workplace.
Imagine how many of those kind of passive moments that exist in the day-to-day world of business, where we're saying a little bit of what we mean, but maybe not fully what we mean. And there's a lot of this happening. How much of that could be avoided if we have the practice of coming back into that more grounded, or how I might describe it, this more present state.
Yeah.
And when we're cultivating and we're practicing mindfulness in this way, where we're going beyond the mind, we're practicing being mindful and aware of the body and creating scenarios like in yoga, where we are going into these poses and breathing through them and practicing allowing the emotional release that's happening there. It's probably many of us, if not all of us, can relate to when we've had a really good cry. There's a reason why we sometimes call it a good cry, because when we're in it, we're probably not maybe enjoying it when we're in it, but right after a good cry, there's this feeling of like the sun coming through the clouds. And there's this level of groundedness that we experience in that moment where things start to clear up. Why? Because we released something that was holding on that needed to be released. And so this is that connection between the mind and that mental aspect of mindfulness and the body awareness, and coming back to the felt sense, creating the space, accepting the feelings that are there, breathing through them, learning how to allow them and hold them. And for many of my clients, this really powerful recognition that we sometimes move away from in adulthood, which is, oh, I actually can contain all of this. I actually can manage all this stuff moving through. And not only can I, but on the other side of it, the clouds part.
Yeah, I want to make one distinction because a teacher of mine recently illuminated this to me, and I think it's so important because, like mindfulness, this idea of like letting go gets confused, and we're like, yeah, I'm letting it go, which means like some of us feel like it's like, well, I just have to like dampen my own feelings about it and like get rid of it. I just have to like forget about it. And this idea that accepting our emotions or really letting them percolate or letting ourselves feel them, part of it is the vibration of an emotion. Emotion is like energy in motion. Part of it is like that moving through your body. But there's another piece of when we can accept it and give the actual emotion that we're feeling attention, like the big cry, like sitting and being like, I'm angry. I'm going to like punch it out on a pillow or whatever it is. When we give attention to it, what's actually happening is not us letting it go. What's happening is we're giving the emotion or the demon or whatever it is attention, and it's letting us go. It's releasing us. There's a little distinction there because it's about, the focus is about like being with it and giving it attention and seeing what's really there, less than just let it go, like just get over it, which I think is a common misconception of like, which is really like, it feels like a stripping of power, I think, when you're in that place of like, I just have to let it go. I just have to forget about it and get over it. That's like, you're not processing when you're doing that. So I just wanted to add that as well.
Yes, I like to sometimes frame this as, instead of turning away from it, we're actually being there with it, almost like we're holding it. We're being there right with it. Like if a small child came up to you and was upset about something, we would not go and turn our back to that child and try and let it go. And that's exactly what's happening here. And so we turn toward it, we practice being with it, and then we're able to comfort that part of ourselves, show ourselves that we show up for ourselves, just like we intend to show up for other people, and how that cultivates our ability to be more present for one another.
I love that. I know we're close to the end here, but I wanted to take one moment because we've talked a lot about how can we use an embodiment practice to process emotions and a lot around like when things are difficult. But I also want to talk, there's the other side to this that I want to like land on just for a moment, that we can also use embodiment practices, like just the way that we can like get closer to the feeling of presence by releasing things or practicing things in our bodies. We can also practice things like creating confidence and creating the idea of creativity or resourcefulness or decision making, or all of this, like a lot of the skills or things that as professionals we're wanting to develop more. And it's like the same thing it's almost like the same thing. Like we can use these embodiment practice to develop the idea of power. Like a very quick story. When I formerly worked in the corporate advertising world, I would go into the bathroom in the biggest stall where there was room, and I would do like warrior two, which is like a very like big, expansive, powerful pose where you activate your legs and your arms are expanded, your chest is open. And Oren, I know you have some really cool ways that you do this with your clients, where you almost get them out of their head a little bit and more into their body to give themselves evidence that, and the feeling of, I've got this.
Yes.
I'm lovable. I'm totally okay. Like I have to go give a public, I have to go give like a big presentation. I can trust myself. Like that is also there. It's possible to cultivate that with these same movement practices, which is like the best thing ever.
I'm so glad you made that point. That is such a strong closing note to end on here. We can cultivate this just like we can support ourselves in the hard times and help relieve the stress. We can also learn to cultivate and bring out those senses that underlie some of those states of being that are powerful, that are present, that are creative and innovative. Maria, thank you so much for being here today. So appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us for Mindfulness Beyond the Mind. As a reminder, please join us every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern for 30 minutes of wisdom, rising in consciousness and mindfulness, and be sure to join our LinkedIn group as well. We'll see you all next time.